Good afternoon, Ways and Means. Today is Tuesday, March 25th, and for this whole week and next week, we'll be focused on education transformation. Right now, that is set up as two separate bills, mostly so that staff can be editing the bill simultaneously. And the plan right now, subject to change, is that the Education Committee is going to be working on their piece of the Education Transformation Bill, which is a third bill right now. It will be voted out approximately Friday, again, subject to change, be referred to us, and then we will amend it by adding our language so that what is three bills will become one bill. And then the plan is to vote that out at the end of next week, where it will have the amount of time and appropriations that we are about to have on the budget. So there's some nice synchronicity there, everyone. Which brings us to the first thing on our agenda today, which is H493, an act relating to making appropriations for the support of the government. Everyone, I know this is an enormous bill. We have a fairly limited jurisdiction over it. We've already reviewed any pieces of it that are in our jurisdiction. And I imagine we will all make decisions on the floor that might or might not have to do with what we're doing in committee today. But we have Chris and Emily joining us, please, to tell us about it.
You take that shit.
No, you take that shit.
No, you
We'll go first. Hi, I'm Emily Byrne from the Joint Fiscal Office.
And I'm Chris Room from the Joint Fiscal.
So I don't have anything official to share. H493 is up on, there's a link on the Ways and Means website, and then it's out on the legislative website. I believe it'll be a part of the addendum to the calendar tomorrow, or it'll be in the calendar tomorrow for consideration. So the FY26 budget, as proposed by the House Appropriations Committee, is built on the official consensus revenue forecast that was adopted in January of $2.4 billion. In addition, there's about $108 million of direct applications and transfers into the general fund. So for about a $2.5 billion general fund revenues and appropriations and transfers. It does rely on carry forward funds from fiscal year 2025 in the order of about $136 million. And it uses, it's sort of, when we think about the budget, right? You never want to use one-time money to cover base appropriations. We actually have sort of the opposite going on, where we have approximately $47 million. Kept wanting to add zeros. I don't know why. $47 million of base funds covering what's been characterized as one-time appropriations. So there'll be sort of reoccurring base funds future. There's about $1 million and $1.5 million left on the bottom line at this point for negotiation with the Senate at some point. It was voted 11-0 out of committee. It fully funds the reserves. There's about $186 million that's transferred to other funds. That includes $77.2 million to the education fund that I know this committee worked on as part of the yield bill. The other big component of that 186 is the $81 million that goes to the debt service fund. And there's about 10 million left that's unspent, sort of in anticipation of conversations around H91, the Human Services Bill on housing. So that has been sort of, is on the bottom line effectively and is set aside for that future conversation.
Representative Brennigan.
Emily, are those figures written somewhere on our screen here? They're not written on your screen. No. There are there are lots of very large spreadsheets on the House Appropriations website and on the JFO website that I think will get sent around probably by Chair Guy later today or tomorrow for people to review, but I just want to give you the whole. There's a lot of appropriations and a lot of stuff going on, but in terms of what's, I thought this committee would want to know about in terms of the budget at a high level. Yes, and there'll be a highlight document that is in sort of the editing process at JFO right now that kind of goes into, it's like usually a one pager that gives the big.
Yeah, could you just repeat the number, the set aside for H91?
10 million. I don't think I have any other things on my notes. At this point, that fully funds the appropriation of the tax department. That's important to this committee. And then Chris has a few things in terms of what's in the language, and some other appropriations.
Representative Kimberly, something?
First, ask a question on downtown development tax credits that I think that was in the bill, or at least in consideration.
They are not in the appropriations bill.
Okay, all right.
It was not in any bills from any committees, but I understand this in the bill from the Senate.
Believe so.
Okay.
We don't contemplate anything that passed the Senate construct.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Chris from Joint Fiscal. Posted under my name today is just a really short chart that attempted to map some of the language that you all looked at in the last few weeks and point you to where it is in the big bill. So I just wanted to run through these. This will not take long. That this committee, whenever you sent your letter to the Committee on Appropriations, you'd requested that they consider funding the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program that is run out of the Office of the State Treasurer. That's the program that helps income qualified Vermont filers file their taxes and often get refundable credits back that they might not otherwise get if they didn't have that help filing their taxes. You'll see that in section B 1100Q, there is a $140,000 one-time appropriation for this purpose, which is what this committee requested of the Appropriations Committee. So that's it. You will see something the committee is very familiar with, the annual link-up language. You will see that show up in E111 and E111.1 with the standard retroactivity language and the effective dates. You will also see the technical piece that the tax department had requested on joint tax returns. This, if you remember, aligns statute with current practice where the tax commissioner says that if you file jointly federally, you should also file jointly at the state unless there's some exception that applies. The most typical exception would be if you're a married couple and one of the spouses lives and works in another state. So that language does not change current practice. It actually aligns the statute to current practice. You'll see that in E111.2. You will also see when the committee looked at H397 last week, the hazards bill, there was a lot of testimony around the pilot special fund, the voluntary buyout program, and the municipal grand list stabilization program. You will see that language in E142.1, 142.2, and E142.3, and it's verbatim to what was in the other bills. You'll also see in the B1100 section, a $1 million appropriation from the pilot special fund to the tax department to support this program. This is what the governor recommended in the budget construct. Lastly, you will see in all the language sections around E715, just the very technical wonky language that repeals the clean water surcharge sunset. Again, this was something that the governor included in his GovRec in a slightly different language form, and what the other committees with the Environment Committee put in that in H481, you'll see that language also show up.
That we voted out of the floor.
Yes. So there were no real surprises or changes to any of the sort of base appropriations that you all looked at a few weeks ago around the tax department or pilots. I think there was a piece of language around the assessments that fund the Green Mountain Care Board that Nolan came in and walked you through. That's all there as presented to you. So there were no Easter eggs on that front either. So if anybody has any questions.
Representative Brendan?
Anything that needs new money.
In terms of additional revenue, there's no additional revenue contemplated in the budget construct. Right?
Correct. I think the only other thing I would throw out, all the numbers that I ran through, those are the general fund numbers. So for those, just to be clear on that's all general fund movement in terms of total appropriations. It's $9 billion. General fund, federal funds, education fund, transportation funds, special funds, pension trust funds, et cetera, but just to be transparent.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you both.
Madam Chair, I would move that we find page 493 favorable.
Thank you. Representative Kimball makes a line H490 favorable. Any discussion? Yes, Representative Dunnigan.
I'm feeling like there's obviously a lot of information we don't have. But from this very high level, very cursory overview, I mean, it took what, 10 minutes? We can't act like we're confident in the budget after 10 minutes, but I mean, I'm okay with what we've been told. I'm a little uncomfortable with a vote that says, yeah, we approve of the budget when we don't have the details really we need. But we're never going, talking to myself here, we're never going to get the detail appropriations gets. I just feel uncomfortable voting on this, but I know we have to, so shut up, Karen.
You're right. That's Representative Dunnigan. I think you voiced some concerns that probably everyone around the table does. I do too. We do this every session. It's
I know.
quite strange.
Yeah,
The Appropriations Committee spent months, including Friday night until midnight on this. And we're not going to be able to catch up to even all the line items, let alone the context they have for each line item. So I know that the sections that we put in the budget have remained what we asked to be in the budget, and that's going to be good enough for me.
that's encouraging.
Mhm.
We did
Yeah.
that, so.
Yes.
With that, Madam Chair, I would point out that I think the general fund for the Vermont Income Tax Assistance Program is actually 148 in the budget, not the 140 that was on.
Wow, Charlie.
Wow.
Very impressive.
Well, that's it. No.
So we had asked for 148. And so it's in the budget.
That's 148.
Yeah.
Hey, Cole.
Anyone else? Seeing no further discussion? The clerk could please call the roll.
Representative Brannigan.
Yes.
I'll vote yes. It's Representative Burkhardt. Representative Feltus. Yes. Representative Higley. Representative Holcomb. Yes. Representative Kimball.
Yes.
Representative Maslin. Representative Odie. Yes. Representative Wabazak.
Yes.
Representative Canfield.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
We have passing out of committee, 10-0-1.
Thank you very much. And we're going to take a 5-minute break while folks who are waiting for hot water get that hot water that was not hot before and Kirby arrives in the room. You can just mute the room if you want, if you don't want to go up.
Yes.
unable to keep secrets. Oh, this whole thing, that's an important part of our work here, about knowing who to tell what and who not to tell, and, you know, I don't get that. I've always wondered about that stuff.
That is such a perfect thing to say in this moment as we restart the meeting, that is now on music.
Are we on the air now? Great. The whole world knows it anyway.
I think everybody who watches knows that already, and I also am not much of a secret keeper myself. When it does all come out on the floor. It does.
Yeah, I know.
So, with that, Kirby, will you join us and take us through this legislative language?
Good memory all weekend.
Is that why you're holding your arms?
Yeah, I hate my shoulders.
Yeah. It's incredible.
Good afternoon, everybody. Kirby Keaton, Legislative Council. We have a draft 3.4 of language relating to reappraisals to look at. We've looked at, I think it's like the fourth or fifth time we've seen this. There's some changes that we'll go through. And I believe, this is going to be connected to the other ed finance stuff that's going to be discussed. I think we're getting to the point where we start to see where there's interlocking parts, and I'll be showing you that as well. So before I start, I'm going to give you the overview of the whole thing. There's 44 pages here, and most of it's conforming changes. There's really what I would consider five bigger things happening. One is, as you'll probably recall, PVR under this bill would be taking over reappraisals. They'll be responsible for them, and they'll be taking place on a regional basis with the regional assessment districts. All other current responsibilities of listers and assessors remain as they are. Second thing going on here is the appeal structures changed. Grievances at the lister and assessor level, at the town level, stays the same, but appeals from grievances would go to the language in this is now Regional Property Valuation Board. We were calling it Regional Board of Civil Authority at one point. There was feedback that was confusing or could be misleading. So giving it its own fresh name and identifying that it's really about property valuation appeals is what this thing's about. And then appeals would go to PVR, and then appeals could go to court from there. And when I say PVR, I mean the Department of Taxes with a full-time hearing officer. The third big change in here is the grand list date changes from April 1st to January 1st. The fourth big thing in here, I consider kind of a big thing, is there's a regional stakeholder working group that Department of Taxes will be putting together to get some more information over the next year on things relating to pretty much everything in this bill, reappraisals and property valuation. And then the fifth thing is there's a section in here for the Department of Taxes to report back on any further needed conforming changes from their point of view, like dates and things that they think might need adjusted just to fit their work. Okay, and with that, I'm going to get into the walkthrough. We start with the findings section. The findings are based off of a lot of material from Act 68 of 2023. There are no substantive major changes since the last time we looked at this. Would you like me to go over those at all?
Do folks want a full refresher on the full bill changes? I think I've looked at this fully. I've looked at this fully recently, but I don't have a sense of if everyone else has. So should we somewhat start from scratch?
I wouldn't mind. I mean, I read it over the weekend.
Yep.
But I thought
Okay, yes,
it's better.
yep.
Okay,
Yeah, I've looked at this from both
So
sides
as
now.
if this is the first time.
Up and down. That's all right.
I didn't
Win
get
or
it.
lose, and still somehow it's
I printed it upstairs.
solutions I still recall.
song. These are theme songs.
What's the song?
What's it like?
Size now.
You saw what you did.
Okay, so
Okay.
Kirby, from the beginning.
Findings, the General Assembly finds based off of Act 68 and the recommendations, or I'm sorry, I'll skim it less. General Assembly finds the final report on statewide reappraisals and property data published by the Tax Department under Act 68 recommended and established.
I know, certainly you don't need to read the whole thing from.
Recommended the establishment of just this part, and then I'll skim. Recommended the establishment and implementation of a regional appraisal system. The report included the following assessment of the situation. First, that Vermont lacks available firms to conduct this work. Second, that smaller municipalities face special challenges in hiring reappraisal firms. Third, that many Vermont municipalities struggle to find individuals to serve as listers and assessors. Vermont has a large number of outstanding reappraisal orders. And then within that, some background info on why Vermont has a large number of orders, or just establishing more background. 135 municipalities were actively under order to reappraise their grand lists as of December 16, 2024. Additional reappraisal orders will be issued based on upcoming results of the 2024 equalization study. And there are 60 municipalities that had their last reappraisal more than 15 years ago, which amounts to about 24% of the municipalities in the state. Average last year of a reappraisal in Vermont is 2016. Municipalities are booking reappraisals for the future right now, for the next few years. And in the past 10 years, about 19 municipalities on average have completed reappraisal each year. And there's background on the Act 68 report, and from the Department of Taxes worked with IAAO to provide research and best practices within assessment offices across the US. And that the recommendations and research made by the department and IAAO serve as the foundation for this act. So there's the findings. Section 2 is getting into the new laws being put in place. There's a new subchapter that comes after the section that lays out PBR's functions or part of those. There will be this subchapter that follows. One change in this version from the last you looked at, I believe, is that statewide and regional property assessment, if it being called out in the title, I believe it was one or the other before. That's really what this is. It's statewide in the respects that PBR will be doing the mass reappraisal work for the most part, but they'll be doing it on a regional basis when they do it. So statewide and regional. This chapter, the subchapter will have a legislative intent section. There's a lot of discretionary work to be done by PBR to enact the requirements here and to try to guide that decision-making in the future. This is the General Assembly's chance to let PBR know that no matter what decisions you make, we want you to follow these things. And so there might be some rewording, but these are basically the same as what you've seen. Properties on municipal grand lists are regularly reappraised. Property data collection is consistent and standardized across the state. And property valuation is conducted by trained and certified individuals and firms. One change that was it's been done recently was, I think this used the word professional. Kind of we treated back from that because it's about having local listers and assessors be highly trained. It's not necessarily making them professionals. That's not quite the right word because some of them are not doing this for money full time, right? At least that's my understanding of that change. And that, you know, a lot of the feedback, by the way, that I'm going to be going over, there was a lot of feedback from the Department of Taxes, and some of the stuff I'm going over is going to be based on what they said. I'll just put that out there generally. Okay, moving on page 4. After the intent section, we have the establishment section for regional assessment districts. There's still 12 of them. They're still based off of counties, which is down here. Franklin and Grand Isle are put together because Grand Isle's quite small. Essex and Orleans are put together because Essex is quite small, right? We do have, I believe, this new provision, which is the director of PBR shall adopt rules relating to the duties, powers, membership, and staffing for regional assessment districts that guide the implementation of this subchapter. That is new. That comes from some questions about how do we set these things up and what are some of the finer details. And previous versions of this had some of that laid out, and then after the feedback and after discussions in committee, we have this now, which is basically putting it back on the PBR to start to flesh that out.
Representative.
Thanks. In B, you said because they're small, you mean it's small in population, right?
It's, in this case, actually, it's parcel count that matters.
All right.
The Act 68 report and all the research indicated that to make it economically worthwhile, it's best to have reassessment or reappraisals done with at least 10,000 parcels. And those two small, quote unquote, small counties had fewer parcels than that.
Thanks.
Representative.
Madam Chair, so in section C, I remember the last time we were discussing this, the director of PBR was here. And there was a concern with the wording of the director shall facilitate the execution of full reappraisals of the district and ensure municipal grand lists are maintained accurately. That piece that talks about ensure that municipal grand lists are maintained accurately was a concern, I believe, for me as well as the director. So just wondering if and what we need to change there. The concern for me, and I thought the director too, expressed that that's quite an ask for those the regional district advisors to maintain accurately the grand list. Because again, that's up to the listers.
I think that's a place of tension that we need to keep on working through. In some ways, that's the whole point of this bill. And in some ways, it's a big ask for PBR. And so I think we have to work with them to figure out what that would really mean for them. Representative Fulcom.
Just to clarify, in that language, it doesn't say that they're personally maintaining it. It just says that they're ensuring they're maintained.
But to ensure that it's maintained accurately is a huge effort. It's not just a one-day look at, the grand list to say, oh yeah, that's good. It's good to go, I mean, and I guess maybe going back, it does talk about the reappraisals. So is it just talking about the reappraisals?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Let's interpret this sentence. The director shall facilitate the execution of full reappraisals of the district. So we know that. The PBR will be in charge of setting up full reappraisals and ensure municipal grand lists are maintained accurately. That could be read broadly, like you're saying, that would go beyond possibly the reappraisals. The two are interlinked, of course. And so if there was a desire to have less responsibility for PBR around that would be the part of the sentence probably that should be adjusted. And then the next part, and are consistent with other regional assessment district jurisdictions, that would be necessary to make sure that the part of that hope here is to have consistent standard data and to have that, to have each RAD use the same practices and line up for one another is part of the policy goal here.
And so I think one of the questions we can work through with PBR is maintaining them, ensuring that they're maintained accurately and consistently. Is that something that can be done through creating standardized practices and propagating those standardized practices? I don't know if that's the word I want. Or if it's, they think that means they need to look at every grand list every day or something like that. So Representative Feltes.
I thought I was reading in here, or maybe a previous version, that the listers, local listers still would have a responsibility for maintaining. The word then was to maintain the grand list locally. And then I would
They,
assume this means.
they would, and they would, and currently, I mean, under current law, listers are expected to maintain grand lists accurately, right? I mean, that's part of their duties. This is starting to, because of PBR's role in reappraisals, this language suggests a more of a connection between those two things, that there's more of a dual responsibility, I would think. I mean, it feels like we're talking philosophically a little bit, because I don't foresee any kind of legal scenario in which PBR somehow has more legal responsibility or some consequence. I'm not really seeing that. It's more of a guiding provision, but it's absolutely something to think about. That relationship between listers and assessors definitely have a duty to maintain accurate grand lists. How much should PBR also, hold responsibility?
Representative Kendall.
I might suggest, and not to wordsmith right now, but it might be easy to say something like for reappraisal of the district and working in concert with municipal assessors or listers, ensure municipal ground lists are maintained accurately and consistent. So that might just answer that question and make sure.
Clarifies the intent a little bit.
Exactly.
Representative Plum, do you still have something? I think I skipped you a second ago, sorry. To eliminate where I was gonna go.
Great. That is the magic of a group discussion sometimes. Kirby, back to you.
Okay, I put a note here that Representative Kimball has some ideas.
Okay.
I didn't catch everything he said.
Great.
We can follow up.
All right.
One thing I want to flag that has changed from some previous versions is there is a reference to district advisor right here in this subsection C. The director of PBR had mentioned concern over naming a district advisor and seeming to put a responsibility on this role that usually under law is either held by the commissioner or the director of PBR. So this is the only reference in the bill right now to district advisor. Every other place where it would have said that is now the director. We've also done a lot of changing to simplify the wording of different things, move things more to commissioner and director, and then try to avoid switching back and forth between those things as well. So just so you know, it still says PBR shall assign one employee to be a district advisor to each regional assessment district, but then all of the responsibilities that PBR has here are on the director from there. Okay.
Could you just say the very end of that sentence again?
The rest of the responsibilities that PBR would have under this bill are with PBR and the director of PBR. Previously there were some places where it said the district advisor shall do certain things. After that feedback, we've backed away from that. I mean, at the end of the day, the district advisor is an employee of the director of PBR. Giving the director the responsibility to do something doesn't, you would still think that district advisors will still be doing a lot of that work. Obviously, the director's not personally doing all of the things we're saying. But as far as the legal responsibility, as far as there is any here, it's with the director. Okay. And then we just have some of the other aspects of this that PBR is responsible for: evaluation of utilities, when it comes to reappraisals. When it comes to reappraisals and consistency between RADs, evaluation of utilities, the application of property tax exemptions, and the correct standard classification and categorization of parcels. We could flag that this could be read two different ways. This is language that's carried over from our very early versions before this evolved and before the property classification language that we've looked at had evolved. This could be read to mean classification and categorization for valuation purposes, which is something that exists in Vermont right now, but is not used for very much. But it's still something that's in the Lister handbook, and there's guidance, and it's something that goes onto the grand list.
But when they come together into one bill,
But but the classifications bill that we talk about are tax classifications, which are different. And under that language, actually, to look back at I think PVR is making that decision from afar, but we'll get into that. We'll be getting to that shortly. But it's something to think about whether we want those tax classifications to be called out here or not, or if we just don't even want to go there with going into categorization and stuff at this point in the language. Okay, I'm going to move on. In facilitating a full reappraisal, the director may contract with and oversee outside property appraisal firms. So it's not required that they use an outside firm. There was some discussion of that, and that language has evolved. Here are some of the changes in language. You'll see the directors listed over and over again here. These are all new. Just the reference to the director, not the subdivisions. So the director may order a municipal lister or assessor to modify the grand list if necessary to uphold any requirements issued by the director or required by the law. The director shall provide training and technical support to municipalities. There's already provisions of law, by the way, that have to do with training and technical support. I'm not sure that this is adding anything at this point. This is also some leftover from when we were thinking of having RADs that have their own staff. So I've flagged that.
and there might be training and technical support needed for the regional assessment district boards.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I should have finished reading my own sentence. In this case, yes, I apologize. In this case, yes, this isn't to the RADs, this is to the valuation boards, the new regional BCA things. So I take that back. That is something we're gonna want. Subdivision 3, the director shall provide legal assistance to municipality when defending valuation on appeal that was made through a reappraisal order under this section. This is entirely new provision in this version. This is responsive to feedback about the relationship between PVR and a municipality when PVR has been in control of a reappraisal, but the municipality is in a place where they're having to defend those values. So this provision indicates that PVR will provide legal assistance. That is not, or that's more ambiguous than it could be, I would flag. You could make PVR legal, like fully responsible for defending it. Legal assistance seems to imply a sort of that they'll help, but not necessarily be responsible for defending it. So if you're okay, like this language works for if you're okay with the municipality still having a lot of ability to lead the defense themselves.
But
Okay,
it doesn't mandate that the municipality leads the defense itself, right?
no.
Okay.
No, this is basically, this language works if we think that PVR and municipalities are going to work well together. And it precludes PVR from saying, hey, it's your town, you're on your own. Like that's what it does now. If your vision though is to have PVR actually take the driver's seat within these, I would change that language a little bit.
I would think I would want PVR to take the driver's seat. I mean, if they're doing the full reappraisal, I don't want to be responsible for defending the appeal process.
As a hypothetical lister. As a hypothetical lister.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's keep that flagged.
Alrighty. So we're going into the standard guidelines and procedures that PBR would establish some standard guidelines and procedures, and we have some new language here that says, and may adopt rules for regional assessment districts. This was based on feedback. I would say that PBR does have general rulemaking authority in statute already, so even without this language, they could make rules around this. But there it is, so that no one questions that. And so the guidelines and procedures and potential rules would address guidelines for contracting with third parties to conduct or assist with reappraisals, including standard reappraisal contract terms. A lot of things go toward consistency in data collection. Number 2, standards for the collection and recordation of parcel data. 3, requirements relating to information technology, including standards for data software contracts and CAMA systems. 4, standardized practices for a full reappraisal, including cases in which physical inspections are unnecessary and how technology is to be utilized. So those are not new. There are some changes in the next subsection, though. PBR shall establish standard guidelines and procedures and may adopt rules for regional property evaluation boards regarding the organizational structure and procedures used when hearing and deciding appeals. So instead of trying to put into statute all of the details about how these boards will be structured and set up, it's putting it onto PBR to produce the standards and things around that.
Am I remembering right? That was a request in the report.
That was a request from the department recently. Farther down in this language where there's this stakeholder working group that the department has wanted very much. I think you've heard them talk about that a few times. And we've added this to one of the responsibilities that stakeholder working group would look at, is to start to figure out some of the structural and procedural aspects of the regional property valuation boards. Subsection C, the first part is not new. PBR shall establish a schedule for each regional assessment district. So we'll conduct a full reappraisal of every municipality in its jurisdiction every 6 years. And then this is new. It's slightly changed language. The director may alter a regional assessment district's reappraisal schedule if the director deems it necessary to effectively administer or to better effectuate the intent of this subchapter 1A. This was broader before. That's the change that was made from this provision. It was basically up to the director's discretion entirely. So we've just put some reasons for why they may deviate. The reason this is here, this provision's here in general, is because there's unforeseen things come up, right? And not having a sort of like safety valve like this could mean that you've got PBR doing stuff that makes no sense because they have to follow the letter of the law. And they're like, it says we have to do it like this. So it gives some, and what exactly, how exactly that may happen, I could not entirely say, but it seems like an area in which there might be things that come up where you don't need to do the entire RAD, the entire county.
I think especially in the first round, they're going to want to adjust.
Yeah.
Representative Wasizaki.
Yes, on the first bit of this section, the guidelines. Making sure I'm understanding this correctly. So basically PBR will set the rules of the road, what the standards are going to be. And then if a municipality within the jurisdiction can do that with their lister, fine. Or they have the option to, as long as they have the option to contract with the third party, so long as they are meeting the guidelines.
No, because of other provisions in here, PBR will be organizing a mass reappraisal for the entire region at once. The municipality would not be responsible for it.
No, I understand that, but the actual, but doing the like, if a town has a lister, they can do that reappraisal for that municipality?
Not on their own,
No, not on their own, in consultation.
but would they work with what PVR sets up?
Yes.
I would imagine that that's gonna, yeah, inevitable.
I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure you are saying the same thing, and no one else, yeah.
Okay.
Marty's particularly concerned that you're not saying the same thing. on a
Okay.
regular basis.
If you're asking, will the listers be involved when there's a mass reappraisal? Yes, I think they will. Will they be running it or be the main ones doing it? Probably not. But there's language in here where there's enough of the stuff's up to PVRs to figure out where I can't fully answer like how much the lister will be involved. I think that that's going to be something that PVR's going to be figuring out in the future under these provisions.
I think one fun feature of this that we haven't talked about, because maybe, I don't know, I'm gonna say it anyway, is in talking to municipalities with like offices of listers who have had appraisals more recently or who have been pushing off appraisals mass appraisals more recently. The idea that the townspeople's frustrations with their new property values will not be pointed at the town is very exciting for a lot of communities. Which is sort of like an added bonus of this that we have not talked about. Yes.
I'd like to give an example of a particular town that doesn't have listers anymore, but they have hired an assessor. And the assessor is currently going through a 2-year reassessment process. Does this leave this open for the PVR to hire that individual for the reappraisal?
I think that it leaves that open, yes. I think that it makes it PVR's decision though, going forward.
All right, thanks.
I believe that the vision here under report or after of the report from Act 68 is to try to get the biggest bang for the buck and to try to do like the whole county using one firm or one team. I don't know if that's how it's going to work in the real world, but I think that like that report though, my understanding and my reading of that report was that is where savings and efficiency can be had by doing it that way.
And the statistical, you'll have
Data pool,
what?
broader data pool.
Mhm. So that presentation that we had, that was like 18 different statistics lessons, one after another. It's amazing how much I have been referencing that actually.
It's a good study.
That we need a certain number of parcels being reappraised at once to do some of this just statistical analysis that we're not able to do now. I think that's part of the report, but that one presentation went into that a little more deeper.
And then I'll have to double check, but I mean, Essex and Orleans County combined is something like 30 towns. That's huge. Small towns of ours, still. I can't see them doing them all in one shot.
That's why there is this kind of language we have in here with some of the flexibility. Language we looked at before about a 6-year reappraisal schedule, because who knows, maybe they find that like, no, actually the best way we can do this is do half of a county 1 year and half of a county the next, maybe. So our language has the flexibility to allow that kind of thing.
Kirby, does this language give the flexibility for the director and the firms that they hire to maybe include the works that's been done by an assessing office that's incredibly good without having to reappraise all those properties?
That sort of thing, I think, would be exactly why we have the procedures and guidelines and this, like the standardized practices. So for PVR to address that one way or the other.
Yeah.
This does not answer that question. This just sort of sets that question up to be answered.
Yeah, right. So I think the way I read it is it just gives the director some flexibility in order to be able to do that without having to follow the letter of the law to say, this is great, no reason to spend money doing that particular town. But
I think that it does. I mean, like, as the drafter here, I am very conscious of trying to not make the letter of the law the enemy of doing what's practical.
Representative Holcomb.
I was gonna say, having been on the other side of laws that I could not implement without breaking them, I think there's actually, I mean, in any big transition, there's some power and administrative flexibility. And it's gonna come back, and if we decide more prescriptive language is necessary, then that's something we could do next year. I think the flexibility is about preventing harm.
Yeah.
Because we didn't understand something that they figure out, so I think that's probably the rationale.
Okay, so moving on, we have in this new subchapter, we have the utility evaluations language that is currently in the appeals chapter under law. So it just has to be moved because of the changes to appeals. So I'll skip over that. It's the same as current law with some word changes in there, but the process is the same. And then that brings us to a new section 3419, the establishment of the Regional Property Valuation Board. Because again, this was being called Regional BCA before, but that name has changed. There'll be regional property valuation boards that overlap with the RADs. And they'll have the administrative assistance of a PBR. Again, this is something else that's mentioned farther down when PBR has a working group to look into things. Subsection B here, all municipalities within the jurisdiction of a regional property valuation board shall be considered members. That's what, same as what we've said before. A regional property valuation board shall contain one representative appointed from each member municipality. There's a change here because this used to say the BCA of member municipality. There's been feedback to say why limit it to that. The point is you want an appointee from each municipality. And for instance, maybe the most qualified.
If my BCA wanted to send the director of our listing office, would that be?
Yes, this is as open as we get. They can appoint anyone to be their representative. Doesn't have to be a person from the BCA, but it certainly could be.
And the part about training from many, many pages ago, would that apply here? Would we need to add something like that here?
The training for.
There was a section many pages ago about training. Not under existing law, under the new draft. That PBR,
It's page 5,
on page 5.
top of page 5.
This is it, right?
Yeah.
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 Would that apply here? Would that apply in the section we're looking at right now?
Absolutely. I mean, it directly relates. I mean, this entire provision is about training and technical support specifically for regional property valuation boards.
Okay.
I really wish I finished my sentence earlier and didn't cause a confusion with that.
We really work to keep you from finishing your sentences.
I just need to go back to again, and I double checked. So Essex County has 19 towns, Orleans has 18 towns. That's 37 towns.
Mhm.
That's a huge property evaluation board.
Yeah,
Yes.
but they're talking about parcel numbers. And one would presume that Chittenden or Orange County or Bennington County would have comparable numbers or even more.
Chittenden's going to have around double all the others. And then the others are roughly the same parcel wise. And I'm basing this off of my memory when I looked this up earlier in the session, but they seem like about, I want to say 30,000 in most, and then it's 60 something thousand in Chittenden for parcels. Municipalities though is going to be different. And that's what you're getting at.
Correct.
The size of the
Board.
board is going to be different from region to region.
I mean, granted, a few of those are gores, and you're, you know.
We go back to that, to the language that we were in, that Representative Higley's talking about. Representative Higley, I agree that these could get unwieldy. I don't know, I can't find my words. And I think we're about to get to a section about how, PBR is going to advise on the governance of the boards and maybe we'll wind up changing it. Yes.
Just to echo, I'm also concerned about the size of the boards, but in trying over the weekend to think of a better way to structure them while ensuring equity to the member municipalities.
One of
Where did you copy this from? Isn't this a structure that's used somewhere else in statute?
I designed some of the structure around regional planning commissions, but I actually have cut most of that back out because we want PBR beside the structure. It was just a decision that was made when we decided to go to this appeal structure. And then it made sense, I think, just for municipalities to have a representative. And one counterpoint, though, to think about when it comes to the size of the boards and how the size might not be a bad thing, is you've heard testimony that currently BCAs have so much work to do that they'll break up into groups of 3 and go do inspections and do their work. So it could be the size, could be an asset.
And we can take more testimony from PBR about that. Representative Lodi?
Thank you.
So, wait, sorry, can I interrupt before you start? If folks can keep their own lists of questions we want to be sure to ask PBR, that would be great, because I feel like sometimes we have a conversation and then the witness comes in and we've already forgotten the questions we had from the day before. So I'm going to formally ask people to write it down. Thank you. Carol.
Thank you. So I was going to say, you could say, may contain one representative appointed from each member municipality and representatives, but no fewer than.
For the membership,
Yeah.
it's literally 1 each is the way it's written right now.
I know, but you could, and it's shall, so it's a
Yeah.
problem. So you could say it may be 1 from each and can be 1 from each. But it's, there's nothing preventing being from 1. Write it this. Nothing prevents you from having 1 for each, but certainly no fewer than X number of people should be on that.
Well, so one previous version said at least 1, and that's been cut.
Yeah.
It just says 1 now. So it would be 1 from each, but just to like talk about how these sorts of things work in reality from my experience doing planning commission, regional planning commission stuff. There'll be vacancies. And it's not like there's these huge consequences if a municipality happens to leave.
Question.
They have a
Are you
representative.
allowed not to go?
Huh?
Are you allowed not to go if you're?
No, the time that I skipped regional planning commission, they came and arrested me. So yeah, I think that's the reality is that I think there will be vacancies that sit open because maybe they can't find someone, or maybe the legislative body is not as quick to respond as they maybe some people think they should, or whatever. There'll just be vacancies, and there'll be people who are representatives who maybe don't participate as much. That's been my experience with some boards I've been a part of.
Yeah.
Maybe the people who are interested in this work, though, take it much more seriously, which is entirely possible. So I'm just kind of maybe being a pessimist about maybe the activity, but maybe there'll be great activity.
And I believe that all of the representatives who serve in this building take their jobs very, very seriously, and occasionally one of us isn't here. Or my town meeting, we had a fiercely contested representative town meeting, and there were people who were not available to be there. It's just how life happens, even if it takes someone to say. Representative Hopon.
First of all, 37 is a big board. I think the local high school is 80 or something. We're just going to say big is relative. But when we go through the next section, which I know we've seen a lot of that language before, if it doesn't say that the board can subdivide for the purpose of the hearings, does that mean it can't? Can they not do things that we haven't said? Or does PBR have the capacity to write in rules that this 37 group of board doesn't have to all be present for every hearing?
I think that's a good question if we did not have a lot of the provisions about PBR setting up a structure and procedures for them. But since we do have that, I think that
Wait, Mark's going
can
to
be answered.
clarify.
And Chair,
Yes, sir.
I want to say that in my years on government operations, this is what we did.
Yep.
We did boards and commissions, and structures. So I'm just saying, I think we're outside of our element here again.
Representative Macklin.
Yeah, I'm thinking, in regarding this situation. Someone said a little while back. Big boards frequently voluntarily subdivide into posses to go do this, that, or the other kind of thing. You and I may agree or may disagree. I think if we get too prescriptive, we'll get tangled up in ourselves on, you know, I think being permissive is a good idea. So long as the final decision is made by the entity and, you know, big board or whatever it is, or something, if it comes to that. But I'm just saying again, I think if we try to be too prescriptive in language on how little posses can go do something, we'll get tangled up and also get tangled up on the floor. It's just a thought.
Thanks. And GovOps is anticipating spending a little bit of time looking at this.
Oh, good.
I believe I said that a while ago, but I'm sorry if I didn't.
I missed that.
Thanks.
I appreciate that.
Not the entire bill, just this. A.
They might have there.
Kirby, back to you.
Okay,
And you said probably, we're on page 7. We should probably pick up our paces.
luckily, lots of the conforming changes, and I will skip
Okay.
right through it. Okay, so this is setting up the structure for the Regional Property Valuation Board. Again, we're trying not to put a lot of the structure into the statute at this point. But what is there is that there's one representative appointed from each member municipality, and representatives shall be appointed for a term of 3 years. That was a placeholder that was put in when this first came up. It has not been changed at this point, but just going to flag that as something that could be changed depending on what you think. They're appointed by the legislative body of the municipality. All representatives may be compensated and reimbursed. And then the meetings, PVR is going to get to decide a lot of procedure and stuff, but they need to stick within the Vermont Administrative Act, though. That's a provision that we have here guiding it. So this is really, pretty bare bones as far as putting something like this together, but leaving it up to PVR to establish. I would not be surprised if they had rules, like actually adopted rules around it as opposed to just guidance. Okay, moving on. Section 3420, appeals to the Regional Property Valuation Board. Aside from a few dates where the timelines are more permissive, partly because of the move to the January 1 date. This is largely the same as what happens now when grievances are appealed to the local BCA. I did add one provision here as part of my conforming changes work that I've been doing the last week, which is there are some municipal charters that establish a tax appeals board or something that like a BCA, but basically where that charter allows that municipality to have some sort of tax or property valuation appeals structure that's other than the BCA that's normal in law. And we're just notwithstanding that. We're not going to allow that. The regional property valuation boards will hear everything, no exceptions. So I think Essex and Burlington were two charters I noticed that would have allowed an appeals board, but we're going to supersede that with this language.
I think it's later in the bill about the role of the local lister's office. Never mind. Okay.
So for the sake of time, we're gonna keep moving on. But again, this is mostly the same structure and the same process that's used for BCAs, except it's being moved over to this regional board, right? I did add a subsection here that was just kind of overdue from where the BCA's had an oath that's specific to property valuation that was in Title 32 in this area. I had removed it at one point because there was talk of having other structures, right? And now that it seems like things have landed on this regional board, I've put that oath back in. But I did modify it, and tried to update the language a little bit. There's no God references and stuff. There's the oath. There's a small change here just to be more specific about how things have changed. In the heading there, appeals forwarded to Superior Court is called out instead of appeals to Superior Court because that option is being removed. A lot of the language was changed around this to make it less confusing. There are mostly references to Commissioner of Taxes in this appeal structure. Because it will be a tax hearing officer running this is the assumption. And the desire of the department. We don't have a lot more changes in this.
What would be an instance in which the select board members of a municipality would agree? Or have an appeal? I mean, I suppose buildings owned by the town, but would there be another reason?
If the regional property evaluation board decides in the taxpayer's favor on an appeal, then maybe the municipality would want to appeal it.
They don't think taxpayer is being treated fairly, or they don't think it's appraised enough for the grand list, or it's too high for their grand list. Or-
That the value's too low and they will not be receiving revenue. As much revenue as they think they should. I mean, is that something?
Well, it could go the other way though, too.
For instance, we have a big empty industrial property in our town. And so far the folks have been paying taxes all along, but pretty soon they're not going to. I would guess that then perhaps the select board might say, even though the appeal is that now it's only worth this amount of money, we still want it to be worth this amount of money so that we get the tax revenue. Is that what you're saying might happen?
Yeah. I don't know how frequently that happens.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of an example of why a select board get involved.
And yeah, and the parts that you're talking about are all current law that have just been.
Oh, all right.
Representative.
Well, I'm thinking is, for whoever's gonna be reporting this on the floor, is it possible to try and highlight what current law is and leave it? Because everything's underlined, so when you say that's current law, it's.
Yeah, I understand that can be confusing. Just in general, when you're reviewing this, just know that the sections on appeals are based off of current law, but who's doing what at any given point is what's being changed. The intent is not to reinvent the appeals process. It's just to have it, instead of it's like current law is grievances, then BCA, then you can go to either a part-time hearing officer, PVR, or straight to court. This new structure is grievances to regional board to tax department hearing officer, which is similar to PVR's part-time hearing officers, except it will be someone doing that as full-time instead of having several people do it part-time. And that it has to go there, no option to go to court anymore. Unless the PVR director decides, or the commissioner of taxes, which is, commissioner of taxes is the boss of the PVR director anyway. Unless they decide together that it should go to court because they just don't feel like they can handle it correctly. And part of the reason there was feedback about the option to go to court, and they actually thought it was in the municipality's favor in a lot of cases for it to not have an option to go to court, because going to court means more expensive, and a wealthier property owner could force things into court and make a municipality pay a bunch of legal fees and basically make them give up because they lose more going to court than what they're going to get out of taxes out of this anyway.
And that's one of the reasons that that PVR now helps municipalities defend, sort of that same dynamic, right?
And also just generally, as what council, I would say, think about that when it comes to court in all cases. That people can always use the courts to bully people into doing things.
Hey, Kirby.
So anyway.
How are we doing on the bill?
Stepping off my soapbox, we'll return to page 17. So appeal structure is basically the same. Again, a lot of references to commissioner now in this version. A lot of that language was cleaned up. And then we have the reappraisal section of law in section 3 on page 18. We added assisting with equalization under part of the per parcel fee. Like why the per parcel fee is paid to municipalities. Previously, the $1 fee for equalization had been moved up into this. PVR had said that they were concerned that there's no compensation for help with equalization. So this is just to clarify that yes, part of this per parcel fee is also for the help that listers and assessors do in making the equalization study happen. There's also a minimum amount for municipalities that don't have as many parcels. So for the municipalities that don't have as many parcels, they'll still get a minimum of 10,000 per year under this subsection going forward.
So the question that some listers have raised about this particular section is the funds from this, are they still to be used for the regional appraisals?
No.
Just for the maintenance of the grant. So and the existing funds that they have sitting in an account that have been building for a new reappraisal.
That's no longer being moved. There's not anything in this bill at this point. There were, in previous versions there was.
Yeah.
At this point, there is no moving of those funds. They stay with the municipalities to be used for the same purposes that they're allowed to be used for, which is grand list maintenance and that work. So I think overall financially, it's safe to say that municipalities are having to pay for less because they're not going to be responsible for paying for mass reappraisals.
Right.
But the money that they do have, they get to now use on grand list maintenance and the other responsibilities listers have to do related to that. So they'll have the same amount of money that can hopefully go farther, it would be the theory, because they don't have reappraisals to have to pay for.
Okay, that's just, the Department of Taxes has to pay for the reappraisals, so we have to figure out a way to fund that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It will cost more.
What?
It will cost more.
And we got a lot of testimony from towns. And I don't remember how much of it was people sitting in the chair and how much of it was floods of emails. But the amount that they receive in those does not even come close to how much they actually need to cover reappraisals anyway, right?
So what are they able to use that money for?
Kirby.
What are they able to use the per parcel fee? It's right there. So it's paid from the general fund, which we had talked about before. And it's to only be used for reappraisal. I mean, I left that in there. I didn't take it out just because of the relationship between what the towns will be doing and what PR will be doing. There still might be some cost to towns to help with reappraisals, right? So I kept that in there. Reappraisal, cost related to reappraisal of its grand list properties. Assisting, and also reappraisal doesn't always mean mass reappraisal. It could mean your updates from year to year. So again, I didn't see a reason to take that out. Reappraisal, cost related to reappraisal on its grand list properties, assisting with the equalization study, and for maintenance of the grand list. Those are the things. So property valuation related work and maintenance of the grand list means a lot of different things. It means the work that has to be put into determining an exemption. It could mean, it could mean, the grievances, and the costs related to doing that.
Then it says, provided a municipality receives a minimum of 10,000.
This was a suggestion from the League of Cities and Towns. They have some math to back it up and they could probably tighten the math if we ask them to. And it's essentially the municipal equivalent of our small state minimum.
Okay.
It's not mine, I think it's the league's analogy, but it is charming. And then essentially like a per parcel fee might never raise enough to actually pay anyone to do anything if you don't have enough parcels. And there's some sort of minimum cost to get it to doing some of this at the municipal level, so. But we have not gotten any analysis from JFO on like how many towns would wind up in this category and how many towns wouldn't, and we have not gotten that yet. Yep.
So I would agree with Kirby that first appraisal wording should come out of there, reappraisal wording. No need for it. If it's, the state's doing the reappraisal now, then the cost related to reappraisal is enough
Yeah,
to cover.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
that's true.
Yeah.
Wording,
So in the second sentence,
that one.
yeah,
Oh, I
it's
see.
used only for reappraisal. But
Understood.
as Kirby explained, the state's gonna pay for the reappraisal, so the cost related to the reappraisal is what the listers and assessors are gonna do.
My interpretation of that, just from a legal perspective, is it's basically the same thing. So you could delete that word or not delete that word. I don't think it's going to change anything in the real world. I don't think anyone's going to take this to somehow mean that towns are responsible for something they're not. And like you said, since cost related reappraisal is so similar to reappraisal, it's redundant. So either way, we could strike it or not. I think it's not going to change anything.
Thanks. Okay, let's keep on going here.
Okay, so there's a lot of stuff that's removed just about PVR ordering reappraisals and things related to that, because that's not going to be part of reality anymore. And then section 4 here is one of the places, it's almost symbolic here, because it's just one of the places that the April 1 date would change to January 1. This happens to be the section on the equalization study. You see January 1 changed there. This is also the same section though, where the $1 fee for helping with the equalization study is being removed, just because that money's being added in the section above that we were looking at.
Something I'd like to ask PBR and maybe Jake about at a future time is, once this starts happening regularly, like how would the impact of the CLA change? I'm just saying that out loud for the moment. You don't have to answer, Kirby. Thank you. Continue on.
The goal is that the CLAs would be nice and
Mhm.
it would all be 1.0.
Uh-huh. That is the goal.
Huh?
And maybe if they're that for long enough, the whole thing could go away. Who knows?
That was one of my questions. And I wonder how much time and effort we spend now on doing the CLA. That's probably over there, but
Yeah, that's the equalization study, part of it.
that's part of it.
Okay, so grievances, just adding and assessors in, or assessors and assessors in places where it's appropriate. That's true for all of the conforming changes throughout. I tried to catch that everywhere. It's one of the things. But this is partly here also to show you that the grievances are not substantively changing this. And even the dates are not changing. So there's more time for grievances. So there's a non-change here that actually has significance, because with a January 1 grand list date and keeping May 20th as the grievance date, instead of it being April to May 20th, it is now January to May 20th to get the grievances done.
Can you walk through the difference between a grievance and appeal then?
Grievances are the first appeal. They're the first opportunity for a taxpayer to say, I don't agree with this valuation and I want you to take another look at it. And they're more informal, and obviously evidence is still a good thing, but it's not going to be any kind of rules of evidence, rules of procedures. It is really just stopping in and having a conversation and an airing of grievances.
You get the wrong number of bedrooms or whatever, but it still goes back to the valuation, which then if you don't, do you appeal that to the regional property valuation board is the question. At what point, if you're not satisfied with the discussion with the assessor, do you take it to the regional property valuation board?
After a grievance.
When you're still dissatisfied.
You go to the grievance, they didn't tell you what you wanted to hear. Now you can go to the property valuation board.
And could you just go to the property valuation board without going to the lister? That's what I read above. Just trying to make sure it's consistent.
There's a lot to unpack with that. There's a lot of different avenues because, for instance, there's changes to grand list values throughout the year sometimes that are outside the grievance window, and those could go straight to the property valuation board.
Okay.
I would want to look into it more about the exact, like whether you lose appeal rights if you don't follow the grievance process. I don't believe so, but I would like to look at that more before like answering about that.
All right, thanks.
Okay. I'm going to jump into there's a lot of conforming changes here. But before we get to that, the other substantive changes before we run out of time. Section 7 of this will repeal the appeals chapter because the pieces of it have just been moved and changed into other places. There are transition provisions that address new reappraisals and when reappraisal orders would stop and when contracts that already exist should be done and when there should be no new contracts, and just a sort of like a kind of winding down of the old order of PVR forcing and ordering reappraisals. I believe this language matches what the department would like to see. In general, what you're seeing here is 2027 as being a sort of a important date for transition, and then for the entire system then to switch over in 2030.
We're gonna need to, the end, I don't know if folks noticed this, at the end of the other bill, we're gonna look at this afternoon, the very last paragraph says, all these dates are subject to change when other things happen later in the week. But in fancier legal language. Slightly.
So that's the transition. It also has the Commissioner of Taxes submitting a progress report relating to progress made in preparing for the implementation of this act. That's just like a check-in this process. The dates, of course, can still change for those things.
I just have this silly question in case I'm never asked to explain this. Is the gap between 27 and 30 because the contracts are issued, there's already scheduled years ahead? Why 27 then 30?
Because 27 is no new orders. And then
Already orders in process that take us through 30, is that?
So if you stop having new orders in 27, that 3 years allows you to get those reappraisals done.
Okay, so it's because you're assuming that the orders that you are ordering until 27 will still take 2 to 3 years to process. Yes, I'm just making sure I understand the timeline. That makes total sense.
We have the stakeholder working group that the department's requested. There's not a lot of details with this, but So PBR in consultation with relevant stakeholders, up to them who they want to contact. Shall submit recommendations to legislature advising on the implementation of regional assessment districts, regional property evaluation boards, and on the development of guidelines, procedures, and rules to effectuate the requirements of this act relating to property evaluation and reappraisals. Those words are very broad. So anything in this whole area, right? Including though rules to be adopted, and those two sections are the rules relating to the procedures and guidelines for both the reappraisal work and the RADs, and also the property evaluation boards, the appeals boards. There's some change here where originally I had written for alleged counsel to come back in a year with any conforming changes necessary after hearing feedback from the Department of Taxes and realizing they're in a different position than alleged counsel to decide what dates are appropriate for things for them. There was interest in having the department report back. So we have some provisions here about the department reporting back on various things. But it's basically to conform, not to suggest anything substantive, but to changes they think they need to make in order to make the rest of it happen, right? And that would be next year that they come back with that, January 2026. I think that in general, at the end of this, one thing of a bug to put in your ear though, is as we have this entire ed reform package put together, having some language in the whole thing to have ledge council look at conforming changes as well could very well be a good idea. Because a lot of this stuff will not be implemented until far in the future. So we will have that time to make sure it all fits together, right? And then from here on, we've got really just conforming changes throughout. You'll see stuff like January 1 is being changed where appropriate. The little things like just cleaning up municipal clerk instead of town clerk, but we've got January 1 there. And I don't need to go through any more of this, like listers and assessors. Instead of Board of Civil Authority, Regional Property Evaluation Board, but you get the idea.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we did some good flagging there. We are making progress. We're gonna give everyone a mental stretch and just talk slowly for a minute. So the next, if we take a 5-minute break, will people actually be sitting in their chairs in 5 minutes? Okay, so let's do that. Great.
Absolutely.
Again, thank you.
Unmuted.
Here we are, continuing our work. For folks who are following along with our agenda at home, we are skipping the second Kirby section and moving into the first John section. And the floor is yours, John.
Afternoon, everyone. John Gray, Ledge Council, Office of Legislative Counsel. I will screen share. Nice. Almost rightly sized. That works. So we're talking about, this draft is listed under my name on the committee's webpage. At the top, you'll just see education finance proposal. This is to be included in a larger bill, so that's why you see that. There are a bunch of different sections with different reader assistance headings scattered throughout this bill. So you're going to see Title 16 updates. So that's in the education title related to the education finance system. And then corresponding changes to be made to Title 32 to account for the tax changes that back up those changes. And then you haven't yet heard about the classification pieces, but those are included here, and I will note them when we get to them and jump over them, basically.
And we have reviewed them previously, so that's
Perfect.
we're a step ahead.
And a lot of this, I think, is going to be hopefully familiar to you, at least at a topical level from walking through the administration's proposal, and I can talk about where things are distinct, and you will see some key distinctions pretty quickly. So with that, I'm just going to start on page 1 and then try to go relatively quickly, but obviously happy to answer folks' questions. So 16 VSA 4001, this is the start of your Ed Finance Chapter 135 within Title 16, and we just need some definitional updates to move from our current system to the new approach. So this is moving to a foundation formula. I've talked before about the modifications to ADM that you see here, so I won't hit that again. But just to call out why education spending is dropped. As you know, under our current system, we create a big bucket of spending for districts. We talk about that, and then we try to apply revenues to this. In the foundation formula approach, what we're talking about is raising a particular figure that is deemed to be sufficient for each student. So you can just calculate out that amount, and you don't need a big bucket to encompass all the kinds of spending that people might envision. That's not to say anything of categorical aid, which is still kind of to be thought about. But that's why you're seeing ed spending dropped here just broadly. Small technical update on page 2 to move from base education amount. This is an amount that's currently used to calculate certain categorical grants to avoid confusion with base later. This has been updated to categorical base amount that's consistent with the administration's language. So this is just a technical change. There's no substantive effect from that. It's just to make it clearer. And then you can see that per pupil education spending is dropped, which makes sense if you've got the education spending concept.
And I think since this is the somewhere between I'm going to say the 1.5, it's not the first time, but it's not the second time we've been through this language.
Sure.
Hoping we can seek to understand, and then our next round, when we look at this again tomorrow, we can seek to modify.
Okay.
Does that make sense, folks?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, go for it.
So understanding, when we see categorical base amount here, are we including in the categorical base?
So this is actually maybe a narrower, as I understand it, current definition in law than you might envision. I think that this figure is only used to determine particular kinds of categorical grants and not all categorical aid. So I guess what I'm saying is this doesn't capture everything, I think, that would be in the bucket of categorical aid.
But it has a very specific 6,800.
Yes.
I'm just trying to figure out what is accounting for our understanding of what's
For
in
sure.
there that leads to that,
Yeah,
because that's very specific.
that I don't know, and it was developed many, many years ago, the 6,800. But I would say the categorical pieces are,
Is that special?
Many years.
No,
No.
no.
God, I have no idea what that is.
This is the amount that's referred to when they talk about the adult ed. They take this $6,000 and they multiply it by all these inflationary factors to get to 12,000.
Okay, so that's what
specific, it's a very specific usage. It's also confusing to use categorical, but
which is, well, we'll come back to it.
Yep.
Because there's also new language coming through in adult ed, so.
Right, but it still calls
yeah.
it the base education amount.
and just to make clear for the committee's benefit, as I was drafting this, I tried to take the most minimal approach possible to addressing the clearly substantive education policy pieces. Obviously, the whole bill implicates ed policy, right? But to the extent that I could just focus on moving the money and calling out the terms, that's what I've tried to do because we're still waiting on a lot to be determined in other roads. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
we'll need to clarify.
Coming to big pieces, this will be familiar, but there's some slight tweaks here. Base amount, this is your per pupil amount, and what you can see distinctive here is this is called out as a cost factor amount. So the idea is this is going to be a determination based on current costs for those features, and then it would be
Sorry, 1 second. The last section we were looking at with the 6,800, can the two of you figure out like where that actually is still used in current law and if we even still need it in current law and if maybe we could call it something totally else that would make it a lot less confusing? Thank you. Great, John.
Sure. That sounds good. To me. I like for things to be good for me. So base amount, per pupil cost factor amount. I did want to call out the cost factor language just to make clear you could have a different approach. And I don't know if you want to chime in.
This is yes. So, okay, the basic construct that we're looking at here is when we were talking about moving to a foundation formula and we were spending all of that time digging into the evidence-based formula, we kept on talking about and getting a little caught up in this idea of funding the current state and funding the future state. Does everyone remember that? And that it felt like some of the numbers were for the future state and some of them were for the current state and they were all mixed up together. The idea, and then we had the many presentations on sort of ways you construct a foundation formula. And one way you construct a foundation formula is with a cost factor, which is sort of based on the current state. It's calculating how much it costs to fund the schools most efficiently. And we'll get more testimony on this. And then the evidence base is to fund a school based on sort of a designed future thing where everything works in a very particular way, right? This is me summarizing like days of testimony into 3 sentences, so forgive me. The construct here is that we start with a foundation formula that's based on the cost factor. And then in the future, once all of the governance changes and school changes and all the ed committee policy stuff has been fully implemented, then the system will be in the future state and ready for the formula connected to the future state, which is the evidence-based with the professional judgment panels attached to it. And so that's like the big construct that John is trying to lay out in this bill. And we're going to get more testimony from Professor Colby later this week to use much better words than I just used to say all that stuff. Representative Holcomb.
So I wonder why we're even fragmenting it that way, because my understanding is that if you use a cost factor with a professional judgment panel or an EB with a professional judgment panel, will come up with the same, tend to come up with the same basic numbers, they converge. So I'm not sure I understand why we're moving from one cost factor approach to an EB approach. I'm not, because it would be adjusted in either case to reflect.
I think that's something that might be helpful to dive into with Professor Colby when she comes in. But I think the idea is that the administration brought forward the adjusted evidence-based model, and with these certain assumptions in it about what an ideal school would look like, and that we want to be sort of aiming towards that in our system and aiming towards certain assumptions in our system, but that we're not ready for those assumptions now.
So we're accepting the assumptions behind the governor's proposal.
The education committee is making a lot of changes to those assumptions and digging into them.
Can I ask a question about this one? Because I think, and it could go either way, right? I mean, every time we pass a piece of legislation that increases cost, that inflation adjustment might not be adequate. So, and it could go the other way. If we actually do make substantive changes in size, for example, we might not need to raise as much.
I think you'll see that there are mechanisms for recalculating and recalculating.
There's like a 5-year check-in for the figures. And just to call out, you'll have the structure of the finance system and there's going to be numbers that plug into the system. So your weights and your base amount those are the pieces, those numbers, that's what we're talking about when we talk about the shift from a cost factor to an evidence base. So it's not tweaking the finance structure, it's just tweaking the numbers. So inflation adjusted, I won't bore you with a description of the inflation adjustment, but I'll just call out this year, 25 here. Whenever the base is set, you'll need to make sure that the adjustment factor accounts for adjustment from the date at which that was set. So that's why you see 2025 right now, but may be updated. Subdivision 17, educational opportunity payment. This is just your aggregate factor for the same piece. So this is the base amount we just talked about multiplied by the school district's weighted long-term membership. And I know that we've talked about this before, but I'll just say again, it's the weighted membership. So this is accounting for those distinctions among students in determining the educational opportunity payment, which is your aggregate figure for a school district that's going out to each school district. So that figure that's going out to districts is reflective of differences in students as recognized by the weighting factors. I spilled water on my trackpad, so it's like being really sluggish. So section 2, we're talking about Title 16, section 4010. You can see that we've removed the reference to per pupil education spending consistent with the changes above. But what I do want to call out below in this section, you're just going to see a lot of placeholders here. This is where your weighting factors are set up. And as we just discussed, this is going to be the incorporation of your cost factor weight, so reflective of current cost for these pieces. So I'm going to jump.
Ask one quick question. So I know that we don't have elementary in here, so it sort of makes an assumption before we even really talked about it, that elementary is a 1.0 weighting. And I just thought it might make sense until we're sort of settled on what all these weights are, that we have at least a line item in there for the elementary, the 1 through 5, because it's just sort of not called out in here at all. It can still have X's next to it, but just to make sure that we're.
Let's try not to make edits yet, just in the interest of us ever getting through this, and totally heard that that's. And it's possible that we'll get testimony that we actually don't need to even call out the grades at all. So. Yeah.
Without edits, but just the thought that.
The thought of changing things.
But this could be the place where we deal with, and we could ask Tim Foley about this, what to do about tuitioning towns that are sending kids away and ways for that.
I think that's probably a different section, but yes.
You think what?
I imagine that's a different.
It would be separate from this section.
Oh,
Yep,
sorry.
no, it's okay. And just to.
I just want.
Just to respond to the point about including the line item, I would say the draft doesn't take a position on what will be included with the weights. It was just the minimal amount of work that I could do to make clear that these are placeholders.
Okay.
Representative Holcomb.
Maybe this is just a bookmark, but we may need to talk about what we use as a poverty weight, given some of the changes happening at the federal level.
Thank you. Good flag.
So I'm gonna.
Will you write that down? Don, you can write it down too. Great, thank you. Everyone write it down.
Maybe.
Julia, you writing it down? Just Tino.
The main changes you're going to see here in this section that are substantive, so not just placeholders. Subsection F. This is now determination of educational opportunity payment. This is just going to restate what you heard in the definition section, but to make clear that this is an obligation. The Secretary of Education shall determine each school district's EOP by multiplying the school district's weighted long-term membership by the base amount. So that weighted long-term membership is what's determined above. That's all the weighting factors, and then multiplying by that base amount to give you your EOP, which is the figure that would go out to the district. And this is the piece that was foreshadowed earlier, updates to weights, base amount, and transportation reimbursement. There's meant to be a 5-year check-in to see if you need to adjust your factors. Under the current system, that would just be an adjustment to the weights because you don't have to account for a base amount in the current system. Under this proposal, you would have a regular check-in on your weighting factors and your base amount, and then confirming transportation reimbursement as well. And we'll come to section 3, which is quite skimpy, but kind of gets out the message that the agency, we need to figure out guidelines for minimum transportation provided and covered by grants. So this is kind of an area for further investigation.
I'm processing a little slower than you're talking, so can I take us back a little bit? when you talk about, I think it's, what I don't know if you call it, section 5, the secretary should lastly apply a weight for pupils who attend a small school. It sounds like you're in this case applying weights at place of enrollment, not for place of origin, and I'm wondering how that works.
So this is just a placeholder section. I don't think
Don't even
it,
worry about
yeah.
it now. Okay,
Yep.
thanks.
We'll see what happens when the actual numbers come in, and then hopefully we'll have guidance as to how those should be applied. So, but this is just the current system approach. Yep. And I can pause again if it's. Yep.
If it's placeholder, I'm good.
So we can jump down to education payments. So this is just spelling out the mechanics and updating for EOP and what we'll come to in Title 32, the excess spending pieces. So instead of the General Assembly appropriating funds each year to pay for statewide education spending and backing out those figures, what we have now is appropriate funds to pay for the education opportunity payment and excess spending. The reason I call out excess spending here will be made more clear when we come to Title 32, but that excess spending, you may recall that in the administration proposal, the local spending was meant to be raised locally and it wouldn't come up to the state, it would just stay locally. And so the legislature wouldn't need to touch that. In this case, the excess spending is coming up to the state, and so the state is appropriating the funds to send back the excess spending.
And it's called excess spending. Charlie did like a lot of wordsmithing with some of you about what to call it. If any, like at some point,
Yeah.
we can go back to our wordsmithing on that. If anyone wants to call it something different, everyone can come to some sort of agreement on the words.
Oh, the state guarantee, that's what we're talking about here.
It's.
This will be different.
It's how to spend on the top above the foundation.
Yeah, local spending, excess spend, however you want to. Yeah.
So this appears to be the definition of the categorical base. It's adult education and secondary credential program services. Students,
Yep.
the question I have is that many of the students involved in post-secondary education are not in credential programs. And so I don't know, I assume that's where we're trying to make sure that there's funding for flexible pathways.
I would love if you and Marty would figure that out and come back to us, and maybe all of that needs to get pulled out and needs to be its own section of statute. I have no idea.
Okay.
Fine. Yep. Thank you.
I'd like to listen in on that.
But like really, if you two could like just go deep and come back with like a full recommendation, that would be so appreciated. Back to you, John.
Technical updates to subsection B. It looks like a bunch of changes here, but really it's just using the new term categorical base amount and then updating the outdated NEAP inflator to reflect NEPA, which is the current use. So new inflator and switch to terms. Subsection C, each school district is to receive its educational opportunity payment and its excess spending if applicable, because conceivably a school district might not vote any funds for that. We can delete, as you may recall, references to the unorganized towns or core amounts, and you're going to see a repeal later on because those are brought into larger school districts and so can be treated differently than other places are. And school districts are capped at receiving those amounts. This last line we may need to think about in relationship to other spending. So that's something to think about when we think about categorical aid. But for now, this is trying to make clear no other funds from the ed funds are taken out. This is just a capture funding that you have through the base amount plus what you voted extra.
Representative Burker?
Yeah, I'm confused about how that works with the categorical stuff though. So for transportation, which I know we haven't sort of made a transportation plan yet, but special ed, other things that aren't captured in the foundation, like I got tripped up on that line when I was reviewing.
I agree. I think that's exactly the question I have about this is how do we think about categorical aid in relationship to this, just to make sure that what this is saying doesn't prohibit other funds from going. The current system has a line, this is a fact because you just have the big bucket education spending, and it may be that we just need to either remove this line or account for categorical aid in some way. But that's, I completely agree. Ensure that this line doesn't have ancillary effects, basically.
Are you going to figure that out for us?
I can, at this point, I know nothing about categorical aid, but I can.
Please check.
What that is.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's delightful.
That was my question.
Just definitional tweaks in subsection F, so nothing substantive there. Subsection I, again, kind of conforming changes with the deletion of references to education spending. Drop that sub 1. We just retain a reference to statewide comparison of student-teacher ratios. You may want to think about what should be included in those town reports. Maybe in the current environment, this should be updated to reflect new information. The Ed Fund. Okay, so we're on page 9, section 5. This will now comprise, in addition to the revenue paid from that statewide education tax, revenue paid from the excess spending tax, which is your effectively local spending.
Which is your what?
Local spending, that's what's raised locally, so above the foundation, above your educational opportunity payment. You're just going to see some conforming changes here in recognition of the move to larger school districts. What you're seeing at the very bottom of the page here, the deleted language, is old property tax credit language. This is material that we went through when we talked about the proposal to move to a homestead exemption. So this is just pulling out those payments that would have been made from the Ed Fund for the property tax credits. Because you're switching to an exemption model, you no longer need that. And we're going to see in this draft, same kind of structural approach to the homestead exemption, but you're going to see a bunch of different categories included. Section 6, cleanup type changes. This is your Ed Fund budget stabilization reserve. There's been this kind of old holdover archaic lead-in language talking about the enactment of the Equal Education Opportunity Act back in 1997. So this is just being pulled out to clean up the section, but it doesn't change the substantive effect of this section, which is to ensure that there's a check-in on the stabilization reserve within the Ed Fund. And I'm sorry that I'm going so quickly. I just stay sensitive to, yeah. Section 7, fund payments. So maintaining the current time schedule that's in place for education spending payments on or before September 10, December 10, and April 30. 1/3 of each payment goes out. In this case, what we reference is the EOP. So that's your aggregate amount reflective of the base, accounting for your weighting, and your excess spending. So just conforming the payment schedule that's currently in place to the new amounts that are being paid out. And there is a change here on line 12. So in existing law, there's kind of a measure to encourage school districts to pass their budgets in a more timely manner. The passage of a budget means something quite different in the new environment because it's assumed that the foundation amount is accounting for differences and that the excess spending or the local spending is beyond that. So you can remove the provision that penalizes a district for being slower in its budgeting process. You no longer need to provide, if you currently needed to provide at all either. You don't have to remove that incentive to pass a budget because it's just a quite different decision in the new environment. So that's what that deletion is. Again, on page 12, we no longer have this concept of, while we do have the term excess spending, to be clear, it's not the old excess spending and excess spending penalty that you may be accustomed to. And that's what these sections on page 12 are about, is districts adopting school budgets that include high spending. So in existing law, we have some archaic language that's talking about that penalty. Those can be removed because you're no longer using that same concept. And again, this was in the proposal that we've walked through before, but just reminding the committee. Similar cleanup changes in subsection D. We have some repeals in section 8. The unorganized towns and boards I talked about previously, or at least foreshadowed, that with the move to school districts, you wouldn't need to include these same provisions to account for technicalities of sending funds or accounting for per pupil spending. Within the unorganized towns and boards, they would just receive the appropriate amount related to their students. And then in 2022, there's suspension of excess spending penalty and a hold harmless provision, which limits the effects of a drop in your ADM on a school spending. And ballot language requirements, those are being removed because those are predicated on the current system. But again, to speak to the chair's point, we're gonna have to work out some of the timing pieces at the end of this when things kick in. And we just may need to be sensitive to repealing these particular sections to account for that.
Maslin, do you have something or was it resolved?
Maybe it's obvious, but unorganized towns and boards said they receive the appropriate amount. Does that actually go to the school board where their kids go? Or do they, however, the budget, but whoever aggregates that sort of stuff and then spends it?
So I think the concept is for the money to track the students.
That's right.
I think it goes to the district and then.
It goes to the district and they distribute to, yeah.
I'm sure it'll all make sense. I just wording, I wasn't sure what you meant.
No, I totally understand. And I think part of the difficulty of describing all of this is that decisions are being made in multiple rooms at the same time and trying to,
Hey, oh, good, thank you.
no, but it's something I'll keep top of mind too, just to make sure that,
Yeah, it's all makes sense. It's all going to make sense.
I hope so.
and I think that unifying the drafts will also make clear where things haven't been resolved. So that's part of it too, is bringing them together will make clear when an assumption in one draft is not.
So before you go to section 9, I want to explain sort of some of the intent of it here. So one of the ongoing problems in our current system is that districts are budgeting based on hypothetical tax rates, not known tax rates, right? And that's one of the many, many confusing parts of our existing system, right? The December 1st letter, will it be, won't it be? How does it relate to what the actual tax rate will be? Why are we developing budgets on this hypothetical tax rate, et cetera? If there is going to be a rate set for spending on top of the base, it would be super duper nice if that rate could be set in advance enough that districts had that rate in hand when they were developing their spending on top of the base. Whatever we're going to call the spending on top of the base. And so in order to make that actually work and not wind up accidentally miscalculating it sometimes and winding up with a hole, there's a reserve in order to sort of create enough buffer to be able to do some planning more months in advance.
Well, I think if I understood you correctly, Madam Chair, maybe I did not. The extra tax rate or whatever we're gonna call it, instead of what we were calling an excess spending penalty last year.
Mhm.
And school boards would know in advance what that would be.
Maybe, yes, yes.
Well, I would say that seems to make a lot of practical sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, yep, so the concept here, before we hit the reserve, you're gonna have your excess spending tax. That's tax imposed locally for the school districts that want to raise excess funds. That tax will raise more than the amount that they have voted on. It's going to incorporate a penalty. And so the amount that they voted on, that excess spending, is going to be returned entirely after being sent up to the ed fund. So that would go back to the district that voted the funds. But because the spending tax would have raised a penalty in addition to that piece, that penalty would be reserved within the ed fund to account for any potential mathematical errors that the chair just described. And then I'll come to a second piece, hopefully to supplement school construction aid pieces as well. So this is pretty straightforward provisions here in section 9, just setting up the excess spending reserve within the ed fund. So again, funds are going to flow up to the ed fund just as they do for the statewide tax. Sorry, I got notification blinking on my. And the excess spending penalty that's paid to the fund, so that's the amount above their spending, it's the penalty that's built into that tax rate, would be reserved within this excess spending reserved. The process for correcting any mathematical errors is your subsection B. So in any fiscal year in which the amounts raised through that tax are insufficient to cover payment to each school district of its excess spending, the reserve would be used to the extent necessary to offset the deficit. And then lastly, any funds remaining after you've performed those calculations, so you've accounted for if there's an error made, any funds remaining in the reserve at the close of the fiscal year after accounting for that process shall be deposited into the school construction aid special fund, which is what's set up next. And I will just say for section 10, setting up the school construction aid special fund, I'll need to think about this in conjunction with whatever school construction provisions are brought in through the education committee, because I'm expecting that they're doing something in the school construction space. So I may need to just change the reference here. They may set up a special fund as well. So.
And I just want to be, I don't think this is going to entirely fund school construction. It's just one part of a puzzle.
Trying to think through how some districts have been big enough to float bonds in the last couple of years. Some districts have tried and
Mhm.
repeatedly failed. How is that going to be handled in this transition?
So I have not yet heard what the funding solution to the school construction piece is. I think there's been consideration of should school construction be treated as something entirely separate from? And I think if you switch to a foundation formula amount that doesn't incorporate school construction costs, which we talked about in this room, it sort of makes sense that conceptually it's a separate matter. So I don't know how school construction is expected to be funded, is I think the simple answer to.
And there's two, I think you're asking, there's two separate questions you're asking. There's the question,
I
how is the,
heard anecdotally that there was a rush to build now
Hmm.
before we changed the formula. And
Oh,
I'm-
yes.
And I'm just
how
wondering
debt is handled?
how it's
Okay,
debt. It's
thank you.
like the
Okay.
bond,
Yes.
existing bonding,
Yes.
because this only is sort of future.
Yes.
looking.
Yes, that's right.
But we're gonna have to figure out how to negotiate the transition because we are going to be carrying bonding forward that people have committed to liabilities, but it's not addressed in the foundation plan.
Yeah, it's possible,
Yes.
it's possible the state's going to need to buy out all of that debt for the transition.
Kind of what I was wondering.
Yeah,
I hear you. That makes
it's
sense.
it's a very important question.
It's a very difficult question.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question.
So that would
Maybe we could come up with like five possible solutions to that problem. One being the state takes over all the debt. That's probably not a solution anyone likes. I'm just putting it on the table.
It also means that we should have a.
So that would certainly mean getting rid of some schools, little schools, small schools.
I feel like that's a separate question, Representative Brannigan. So this is about construction debt from the past, just how it's carried
Oh,
on a-
I see.
on a balance line, like on a
30
balance
million
sheet.
bond On our balance.
Yeah.
And wouldn't have available, the point is they wouldn't have available post switching to a foundation formula, the same options, particularly if your excess spending is capped to account for. Yep.
And they might have made different bonding decisions.
I thought you were talking about construction needs that are just kind of hanging there and not being addressed.
That's also a very important question. That's a different question. Yes.
So I will just say, I'll have to leave this room in like 10 minutes. I would love to hit the excess spending, kind of like the core piece if possible, because much of the other pieces are going to be familiar. So I'll just quickly describe special fund. This is going to be, as you would imagine, providing grants to assist with construction projects. And some of the funds would be those from that reserve waterfall. I'm going to skip over to the property classification piece. So I'm going to briefly pause my screen share to not induce whiplash if I can.
We can also just.
Yeah, Kirby will be back to talk about that. And I think that hopefully a lot of that is familiar to you. So I'm going to jump down to page 20, the bottom of page 20. Okay, resume. So the education property tax rate formula, we're now in Title 32, the title you guys are more familiar with working in. Same point related to education spending, just the lack of necessity for the concept. Excess spending, this is removing the old concept. You're going to see a new term for excess spending later on, so I will distinguish that. And as mentioned before, we can wordsmith if that's helpful for folks. So we can skip past these pieces. As we talked about before, you no longer need a property tax spending adjustment or education income tax spending adjustment because you're moving away from the existing yields. They're trying to account for differences in spending district to district. You now have the foundation amount or your educational opportunity payment. You see the removal of the yields in recognition of that fact and the statewide adjustment as well. Because the statewide adjustment is tied to the use of the yields, it's accounting for its effect. But let me come to the actual core concepts here. So excess spending, we've been talking about up to this point, but this is the spending that a school district approves in excess of its educational opportunity payment for the fiscal year and for which no existing revenue source is available. And then there's a cap included on page 23, line 2. Provided that no school district shall approve spending in excess of 10% of the school district's educational opportunity payment. So just note that there's a cap here and there's a 10% proposal on the table for that cap. And this is your spending, it's your local spending above the educational opportunity payment. excess spending penalty. This is what I was getting at earlier when I was talking about the excess spending rate and what would be reserved within that reserve within the ed fund. What is reserved within the reserve is not the excess spending that was approved, just that voted amount. What is reserved is the penalty. So that's what we're talking about here. And you're going to see excess used so many times in this sentence, which I find sort of humorous, but hopefully it's clear. Means the amount of revenue raised through imposition of the excess spending tax that is in excess of the school district's excess spending. And it will make more sense once I talk about the yield. But before I talk about the yield, I'd like to talk about the subdivisions 21 and 22 and come back because the yield is the most kind of complicated piece of this and where I think energies are probably best spent. So per pupil excess spending, this is intuitive. This is your per pupil amount of excess spending. So it's your per pupil amount of voted spending, resulting from dividing your excess spending by your long-term membership.
So just to be clear, is this weighted pupils?
No, so this is
This is your
just long-term,
ADM.
this is long-term membership, so it's the 2-year ADM. And including state place students, it is not weighted. And I'll just briefly describe the rationale for this, or at least as I understand it. So the educational opportunity payment builds in the weights into its factoring. So you have your base amount multiplied by weighted long-term membership. And so the thinking is, at least this is one concept, is that the educational opportunity payment is accounting for the differences among students through the weighting factor at that point. And so the foundation, if the weights have been determined appropriately, would capture those differences, and that the excess spending wouldn't need to recognize the same kind of differences. But it is a policy question, whether you would like that to be the case. But that's the rationale, at least as I understand it. So per pupil excess spending, it's your voted amount per pupil, divided by long-term membership.
And folks, Julia can talk this all through with us in Happy Land tomorrow afternoon.
Before jumping to the yield, I also want to call out what the yield is predicated on. This last definition you see on this page, school district with the lowest taxing capacity. I hope that the term is intuitive enough, but this is the school district that's anticipated to have the lowest aggregate equalized education property tax grand list per long-term membership. So who can put forward the least in property tax capacity per student is the basic concept here.
And so if folks remember the state guarantee concept from the administration, it's similar to that, but a little bit.
It uses a median. So in the case of a median, you'll recall that one of the effects of using a median was that folks above the median weren't being penalized for being above the median, and basically they could tax at lower tax rates than those at or below the median of this aggregate equalized education property tax value per student. So by using the minimum, the lowest, should I pause? I just looking around if there's.
What?
I thought that perhaps people were confused and I should pause. Getting a lot of glazed, sorry.
I think we're like nearing the end of everyone's capacity for the day. It's not you, John.
So what this, conceptually, what this is doing is identifying the district that can put forward the least in tax capacity per student. And the reason this matters is we're trying to determine a yield that basically equalizes the tax rate for each school district as it's raising funds at the local level. This way, each person has the same taxing capacity. Each school district has the same taxing capacity when it's going out to raise local funds.
I'm going to ask everyone to just sort of like sit with that in its mild confusion, and then we are going to readdress it tomorrow with Julia.
The only question I have for that is, you said each school district has the same taxing capacity, and before there's each person.
Sorry, I mean school district. Each
All right,
all right.
Yes.
And sorry, definitionally, and this 22 only applies to 20? Or are you saying that generically for the?
We only need this concept
That's what
for
I'm
the excess
clarifying,
spending yield.
yes.
Exactly. This isn't
Making
something
sure.
that, yep,
It
so.
doesn't apply to the base.
Exactly.
Because otherwise you'd be double weighting.
Yep. So the educational opportunity payment, the base, all those pieces are dealt with through the statewide rate. This is talking specifically about just raising those local funds.
That makes sense.
So just to clarify, that is basically trying to just get at Brigham. That is trying to say that we're trying to make this Brigham compliant while still allowing people to.
I guess I would offer, especially given that like this moment is like a place where legislative intent is set forevermore. That the foundation formula, the weighted foundation formula itself does a lot to get to Brigham. And then making sure that the way those taxes are raised, being equitable, gets to Brigham. And then this part about making sure, I would say less about getting to Brigham and more about making sure that the schools stay with equitable educational opportunities into the future, even if they can raise money on top. Yes.
I think we can't talk about Brigham without talking about delivery.
Yes.
So just,
Agreed.
because there's no way at the same tax rate or the same foundation rate that a school of 100 can do the same things as a
Yes.
school of 300. We have to be clear on that. I hate to bring this up, but we're gonna, because it's painful and I know I'm gonna have to take responsibility for it. I don't know if the two interstate districts are gonna be able to meet the obligations of federal law.
Yep.
Under this foundation plan, I'm just saying. So,
Yep.
and I don't like it, but that is a reality.
I really wish we could get Congress to act on it because it's making everything so much harder.
Well, I don't know what the
For
answer
them too. No, there is no, I know, it's
There is-
really
I don't
hard.
even
It's
know
very
what the
hard.
answer is.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
it's
know.
just an interstate school district.
Yeah.
New Hampshire doesn't redistribute.
I know. It's why the whole thing is wild.
That's the issue right there.
Agreed.
And that's why we pass that.
If you two could solve that or not solve it.
Look back from it.
Yes, but like, let's think about like what we need to carve out or what we need to adjust in order to make sure that we don't lose those districts we don't miss out on meeting those districts' needs. We're running out of moments.
Yes.
John, I'm going back to you and I'm going to remind everyone that this fairly complicated concept is going to be re-explained with diagrams tomorrow.
Okay, so I do need to run and I'm very scared to leave a very complicated thing on the table as the last thing that I say. So excess spending yield, I will just say a super simple way to think about this. When you, it's basically asking a school district to imagine that it is the school district with the lowest taxing capacity. That's what this is doing. It's saying, imagine that you have the taxing capacity that that lowest taxing capacity district has. And you can determine your spending relative to what they could raise at a particular tax rate. That is generally what a yield is doing in the current system. The thing that is distinctive here that you're going to see is this reference to 0.80 per 100. This is trying to build in a penalty, and this is how you end up with the excess spending penalty that is reserved within the reserve. I do have to run, so I hope that that may actually be more helpful than if I went on at length trying to explain this. But that's the way to think about it. It's asking a school district to imagine that the lowest taxing capacity district and building in a penalty. And from that, you can calculate your necessary rate to raise funds for your excess spending and then produce a penalty that can be used to offset mathematical errors and potentially go to school. And with
And
that,
potentially go to raise lowering property tax in the future. So one section you did not take us through is the section that we've already gone through in some depth earlier, which is the homestead exemption. The only adjustment to that are much mathier than wordier. And so we'll go through that with Julia tomorrow.
very cool.
Okay, so folks, I see everyone's eyes and that's how my eyes feel. Do we want to do the final section with Kirby or do we want to stop for the day and get back to it tomorrow?
I say good to stop.
Okay, all those in favor of doing a final section with Kirby, raise your hand. All those opposed. Okay, great. Sorry, Mark.
Mark, where was your hand?
Opposed?
Not your job.
That's the point.
And while Kirby's settling in and Mark's cleaning up his missed basket, I'm, so, it was your missed basket. Thank you, Mark, for cleaning up Jim's missed basket.
You almost speak.
Yeah.
Years anyway.
Folks, tomorrow morning, we're gonna hear from a whole bunch of stakeholders who have been watching our progress the whole session and have not joined us for a little while. To look at sort of as far as we've gotten with the language. One, I think some of them are gonna be frustrated, there aren't more numbers attached to it yet. This is not gonna be the only time they come in over the next 2 weeks. Just wanted them to come in sort of as we were diving back in and refresh our memory on what we're doing and why, and sort of their big flags, big concerns, big hopes, opportunities for us. And then in the afternoon, we're gonna head back into all of this legislative language, but with some assistance from JFO. Okay, back to you, Kirby.
Emery, is it showing up that I'm trying to join? Okay, so we have the same document that Kirby Keaton Legislative Council, by the way. We have the same document that Don Gray was just sharing. There are 6 sections in here at the moment relating to classification. John and I went ahead and took the step to consolidate these because there's a couple of sections that overlap between the two, and it was relatively easy to integrate, so we went ahead and took that step. The first section we'll be looking at is 11. Yeah.
Page 15.
So you see on section 11, you see the user assistance heading, property classification, where the big substantive parts of this change is present there. We've gone through most of this before, and I'll try to mark for you what's new here. So we have the grand list contents section of law. These are the things that are to be included on the grand list. And it's adding a tax classification as an item that goes on after the brief description of each parcel. And then there is a new thing here that changes the definition of a parcel. And this is based off of BCGI's language that you've heard about when they came to testify. So it states as used in the subdivisions. This is parcel for the purposes of the grand list, right?
Sorry.
We're on page 15. Page 15, line 12. As used in this subdivision, parcel means a separate and sellable lot or piece of real estate. Parcels may be combined to represent all contiguous land in the same ownership together with all improvements.
And folks, this was in the report from PBR.
And I'm not the best person to speak about the policy reasons for this. So you've heard testimony about the policy for this. But so this goes to data collection reasons. Under current law would read a brief description of each parcel of taxable real estate in the town. Parcel means all contiguous land in the same ownership. So the default that we're going under right now is to combine parcels that have the same ownership. BCGI does not want that. They want to be able to have data on each of those parcels separately. And I wish I could tell you more. I'm failing to.
That's okay, we can have more.
Right. Not my,
Give all the testimony, it's fine.
thank you.
Active versus inactive parcels.
It has to do with when there's big
It's
differences in use. Yeah, it's okay. It's 4 o'clock, Kirby, move on. Okay. So property tax classification, section 12. So that's just to mark that on the grand list, there will be a tax classification listed with the parcel. And so let's get into what the property tax classifications are. Starting, the grand list of a town shall include one assigned. I have made some changes throughout to try to distinguish these tax classifications as different from the valuation categories and classes that exist. They're distinct things. I know there might be some confusion, so I'm trying to call them tax classifications where I can, because again, the entire point of all of this is to set things up to have non-homestead tax rates that are based off of different classes and having the possibility of a different non-homestead rate for each class. Okay, so the grand list shall include one assigned. At the moment, the way this is drafted is, even though there's mixed use parcels, this is drafted in a way in which there's going to be one default assigned class for each one. And then they shall be classified as follows.
And if anyone, either listening on YouTube, in this room, sitting at the table, not sitting at the table, has a brilliant way to solve the mixed use problem, please don't speak up right now, but speak up soon.
Yeah, so taking a step back and taking a cue from that, I will say what we were about to look at is a way to do property classifications that based on the feedback that was received of other versions of this that we've looked at, that tried to get into nuances and tried to resolve some mixed use issues. The ultimate problem was we don't have the staff to chase down and look at how people are currently using their property. And we especially don't have the staff to do it in some surgical way in which we're really trying to nitpick what's going on this parcel. So this is drafted in a way where it's a broad brush. It is based on the data we do have without going out and looking in the ground. How can we divide things up? Is it going to be surgical? No, it is going to be big baskets, but it's going to be hopefully doable with the staff that exists. So with that said, we'll go into what it looks like.
Representative Moody.
This is, yeah, maybe I'm not supposed to say. Might be right here.
I don't know.
Well, go for it. I
It's-
always say it.
And you,
We'll say it.
thanks. Can you look at people's tax returns and if they are filing and making deductions and all kinds of things for a property that's a rental, that's part of their house or whatever, then you know, yes, that's what it is.
Well,
If they haven't been, then you know they haven't.
This makes a lot of use of the tax data that is collected. It makes use of homestead declarations and landlord certificates very much.
Further,
Yeah. For rentals, instead of looking at rental income or something like that reported, it looks at landlord certificates to try to identify that.
I was thinking within a house. That's mixed use.
We'll get into how it works mixed use. It's going to be a sort of, like a waterfall might be one way to think of it, is
I like to think of it as a decision tree.
a decision tree. It's linear though, because that's kind of the point, is that if you're affordable housing, even if there's some other use there that you might classify as both for that parcel, this is written, we're going to call it affordable housing. That's going to supersede some other use. And it goes affordable housing, ski resort, public use. Those things will be, if those are the uses, which those affordable housing will be something that can be identified like without on the ground inspection. Ski resort will be PBR having to decide what that is, and it's going to be based off of ownership and possibly looking at some tax information. And public use is going to be based off of whether there's an exemption that applies. Those would be first, and then you would look then at if it's residential. And that's going to be determined by one. That's where you have to look, does this classify as residential for property valuation purposes? And then combined with, is it residential and lacking either a landlord certificate or a homestead declaration? We'll get into all the details later. but without giving you the details, it goes residential, and then it would go to, under this, it would go to apartments. Then after that, it would go to industrial, and then commercial, and then vacant land. So if you have mixed uses, it's like you would go by that ascending order that I just said. And if it's commercial plus residential, we're calling it residential. That's the way it works.
Representative Bigelow?
Maybe real quick, you'd mentioned hoping for enough staff. What staff are we referring to?
That's just it. Like, yeah, I mean, basically, we don't have it. So the imaginary ones. But yeah, I mean, like, as you know, listers and assessors are doing a lot of the deciding how things are categorized on the grand list for valuation purposes right now. And a lot's being asked of them. So at one point in this session, we had talked about, well, we're going to create these regional assessment districts that have a full staff, and we're going to have a lot more basically people who are doing lister and assessor work. That bill went a different direction. We're not imagining that future anymore. So how do you make the classifications work when you don't have all that extra staff? That's what we're looking at. Just using mostly information that we already have, trying to create these classifications. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Okay, so so the grand list of a town shall include, so I mentioned when I was going through the bill earlier, I didn't recall what entity was supposed to do this, but the way that this is drafted is it is based off of what's marked on the grand list, and that's going to mean the lister and assessor level. They'll need to put a tax classification down because they'll be the first ones looking, and so when they go to do that, they'll have to they have to choose one of these general classes. They can take things like municipal ordinances, zoning, stuff like that into account in figuring out, to the extent that they need to figure out residential, commercial, industrial, which are going to be the three those are the only three things really, the way it's structured, that they'll have to choose which of those three is it. And then based on other considerations set forth by PBR, right? And then we have our classes, which have not changed since we first started talking about this. Residential A and residential B, the difference between those two is whether if it's worth $1 million or not. Apartment, and when I say worth $1 million, it's if it's equalized grand list value, specifically, 1 million. There's apartment, affordable housing, commercial, resort, industrial, undeveloped, and public use. And then we'll get into the definitions. The one area in which there might need to be some more work as far as that's on me on this is that right now we have an affordable housing definition that is my understanding it gets after housing subsidy covenants and other types of affordable housing, but the definition we have here doesn't capture all the different types of affordable housing that exists right now. And so to find out ways to identify those other types, I have some feedback from
That have like more temporary covenants. That have more temporary covenants.
I just had different setups besides just the housing subsidy covenants and things like that are used. So still getting at maybe including some more things in this definition. But the idea will be, the way this is drafted is it's something that can be identifiable at the state level and be told to the lister, okay, these are the parcels that have affordable housing. So they can just do that, right? Like, because that's the idea here is just for a lot of these classifications, it's just the state being able to, PBR specifically being able to say, here's a listers. These are the ones you should mark as this category, in this case, affordable housing. And in this case, the way this is written, it's those with the housing subsidy covenants and things involves a property shall only be classified as affordable housing if the department, so they'll be the lead, in consultation with Vermont Housing Finance Agency and Department of Housing and Community Development, finds that on or before January 1, because we're still doing a snapshot for all of our property stuff, except for change to January 1. The grand list dates are snapshot for this year, or whatever the ownership and the uses, that's what we're going to use to base all of our decisions off of. That the taxpayer has presented sufficient information showing the property qualifies as affordable housing under the subdivision. Which goes to these like housing subsidies, covenants and things like that we were talking about. And then it also says a parcel shall be classified as affordable housing if it qualifies under the subdivision without regard for whether it qualifies for a different classification. This is what I was talking about, the waterfall. This provision says if it's affordable housing plus residential, if you could say it qualifies as both, you're going to put it down as affordable housing. Okay. That's what this provision means, except if it's owned and operated by a ski facility and used in relation to the ski facility, it will not be affordable housing. So this does not exist as far as I know, but in the future, when a ski facility decides to throw up affordable housing on their property, perhaps to maybe be taxed differently, it won't work out that way. It will be considered a resort and not affordable housing.
Representative Odie.
I have something to say. What is workforce housing? Because at ski areas, so that people don't have to find a place to live and have a car and get there. And what about on farms?
When we get to the resort definition, it will cover what you're talking about for the ski areas. As far as for farms, if it's residential but not a homestead, if it's a homestead, remember that's going to be a homestead, right? So if it's residential use,
It's a rental property.
if it's either a rental property or if it's just being used for long-term tenant, if it's but if it's being used for residential and it doesn't qualify as a homestead, it will be called residential under this, even if it's on a farm that might be called commercial otherwise.
I'm just pointing out
Okay.
the migrant worker situation.
Mhm. And yeah, so under this, it could be called residential. Now, if there's,
Ask you to think about it.
if they have landlord certificates under this, they'll be called apartments. So look, yeah, it's, one thing is, should get through all the definitions so you guys understand how the pieces work before doing the scenarios.
Yes.
Quick clarifier, and I so look forward to the map of the waterfall, but why would you name just one specific industry and not just say generically, industry shall not be classified as affordable housing or something like that? I'm just curious, why one industry and not other industries?
Because in this case, like affordable housing, it's saying that if it's affordable housing, it will be called affordable housing without regard for any other use, right? So all except resort, because resort's at the top. If it's resort, it can't be called anything else. Then it goes to affordable housing. If it's affordable housing, it's affordable housing, can't be called anything else except resort. Then the next one down the line will be,
What if it's commercial versus affordable housing?
then it's affordable housing.
So why, if it's commercial affordable housing, are they getting treated differently than resort?
Because the stack needed to start somewhere and we can make policy decisions about changing that stack, or we can make a policy decision about mixed use.
This
Which might be.
waterfall and stack.
The waterfall, it'll be
Yeah.
easier to make those steps.
It's how you can have these buckets and deal with mixed use at the same time. Yeah, nothing is.
I think we gotta come back.
Let's go through the whole, let's go through the whole thing.
That's not my question.
Okay, so our next classification is apartment, means a parcel with one or more dwelling units, has an affiliated landlord certificate filed for the current year without regard for whether the homestead declaration is filed for a portion of the parcel, and does not meet the definitions of residential A or residential B due to having a dwelling unit without an affiliated homestead declaration or landlord certificate. So let's break it down. You have a parcel that has, let's say, one unit. If you have a parcel that has one unit on it and it has a landlord certificate, it's an apartment. Let's say you've got two units. One has a landlord certificate and the other does not. Let's say the other use is residential and there's no homestead declaration. That's going to mean that it defaults to residential. It's not going to fall under apartment under this because it does not meet the definitions of residential A or residential B. In that case, it would meet the definition of residential A or B, and so therefore not be an apartment. Let's say that there is a homestead declaration filed. This is where we get under current law. If you own a duplex and you have your homestead on one side and you rent out the other side that you rent out is taxed as non-homestead, right? So under this, that's why we have without regard for whether a homestead declaration is filed. In that instance, under this, it would be half of it would be homestead, like current law, and the other half would be taxed as apartment classification. Does that make sense? Okay. So as far as I'm gonna keep saying waterfall because I don't have a better word for it. As far as where apartment fits in our waterfall, it's residential is above it. As far as if it's residential, it's not going to be called an apartment, it's going to be called residential. But if it's commercial or industrial as a mixed use, you're going to call it an apartment. Commercial means a parcel used, so their next definition is, these are alphabetical. Commercial means a parcel used for business activity that does not qualify for classification as apartment, residential A, residential B, or industrial. And then parcels with a commercial classification shall include, so commercial is quite far down the line. If there's mixed use, it's probably going to be called one of the other things. If you've got an apartment over a store and they go on the grand list as one parcel, then in that scenario, it would be called an apartment and taxed as an apartment. There's policy decisions built into this, as you can see, where the waterfall should coincide with the uses that you want people to have as far as providing housing and stuff like that, by the way. And then under commercial, parcels and units used as timeshares are called in here commercial. That's a policy decision that could be changed. Parcels used for lodging establishments are commercial other than resort, office buildings, farming.
Homeless shelters, commercial.
Homeless shelters, I imagine, is part of what we maybe want to bring into affordable housing. That's the policy decision. Not
Public use.
And they have a,
to the extent that there's an exemption that exists already, they would be public use.
You know, it doesn't seem overly hard to me. It's pretty self-explanatory,
What is?
labeling all these units
Great.
you can live in.
I love it. Good. Okay. Let's put it out right now.
I would love it.
So actually,
Make a motion.
I think in some cases, I think that's totally true for like 99.5% of it. And then the 0.5 is going to be that eats us alive. And I think we need to be careful not to get eaten alive by it. Back to you, Kirby. Who's been eaten alive by the 0.5?
The next definition we have is industrial. It means a parcel used for production, fabrication, or processing of durable, non-durable goods and does not also qualify for. This first part of this is your standard when it comes to classifying properties for valuation purposes, calling it industrial. It matches what you would do in that case, just like the commercial above.
And this definition was on the advice of the chamber.
Yeah, part of it. It was fleshed out a little bit by feedback from chamber. And then this stuff below it that does not also qualify for apartment, residential A, or residential B. And that's just to say that, again, if you've got a mixed use of industrial and residential, it's going to default to residential. If you've got a mixed use of industrial and apartment, it will default to apartment. And I'm sure that exists, even though it's strange to think. Parcels within industrial classification shall include, and then this is also some suggestions from the chamber, but also things that are in line with what the common understanding in property valuation world is what industrial means. Public use means a parcel qualifying for an exemption from state taxation. I have not added in any further language as far as the waterfall. In theory, public use is pretty much the top of the waterfall because if you're extension event. Next one is residential A means a parcel improved with one or more single family dwelling units and having an equalized value of less than 1 million. And then the rest of this, a parcel shall be classified as residential A or residential B if it has any dwelling unit habitable on a year-round basis that does not have an associated homestead declaration or landlord certificate on file, provided that the Division of Property Valuation and Review may change the tax classification if the property would be misclassified due to a taxpayer's failure to file a homestead declaration. The last part just gets at that problem that comes up from time to time that people who don't have to file income taxes, they mistakenly don't file a homestead declaration when they should. And this just allows a correction to that when that problem happens. But the gist of it here is if it has a residential use and there's no homestead declaration or landlord certificate, you're calling that residential here. And you have residential A and residential B so that you can have tax rates on different values of these residential properties that are basically not being used for year-round residence and also not being used for rental, long-term rental. So residential B is significantly the same as residential A, except that it's having an equalized value of 1 million or more. And then we have resort, which is a definition that I'm sure PBR is going to love, because it makes them have to do a little work. Resort means a parcel owned by the operator of a ski facility and used in relation to the ski facility to provide lodging, recreation, amenities, or food services for employees or guests. So the question before is, what about housing that's on a ski property? That's going to be called resort here. A parcel shall be classified as resort if it qualifies under the subdivision without regard for whether it qualifies for a different classification. So resort is resort, and there's no way to put up some other use on your property to get out of that. And then we have some subsections or subdivisions here. PBR shall annually identify the parcels to be classified as resort and inform the listers and assessors of the designation. So this is not having the listers and assessors in ski towns have to do a ton of extra work. PBR can put in the work, and presumably they will use the access the department has to identify the parcels owned by operators of ski facilities and then trace back and identify those parcels that way. I'm sure we'll hear, or it's possible to hear feedback that they might need more than what this says. A property owner shall, and then subdivision B here, I ran Jake off, I'm just kidding. Subdivision B here, a property owner shall provide information to the director on request to assist in identifying qualifying parcels. This is just saying that the property owners for these resort properties have to work with PBR to help identify this for the classification. And then that's how the resort is dealt with. Lastly, we have undeveloped, and this is in line with what's considered undeveloped for valuation purposes under Vermont law right now. It means an undeveloped parcel and includes wooded land, shared lot, shore lots, residential building units, unimproved commercial lots, unimproved agricultural land, and parcels with buildings of little or no value, such as small camps. A parcel shall not be classified as undeveloped if it meets the requirements for a different classification. So as far as the waterfall goes, undeveloped is on the bottom.
He has like 4 sentences left, so I'm gonna let him finish this section of it.
There's a few one-off things to try to answer some questions that would come up in this. For condominiums, they'll be classified individually based on the actual use of the unit. So you wouldn't call all condominiums commercial or like a whatever. It's going to be depending on the use. Secondly, farm buildings and improvements that are not used for a business purpose and are associated with residential property shall be classified along with residential property as A or B. I'm not sure under our current language. I should revisit that to see if we still need that. I should think about that. Subdivision 3, nothing in this section shall be construed to alter the tax treatment for current use. This is where we just make sure there's no conflict between these classifications and what current use does, because current use does a similar thing in that it alters the amount of property taxes you're paying, right? So we don't want any confusion there. And then there's an appeal section, which this is new to this version of things. So persons aggrieved by a decision to classify property for taxation purposes under this section may appeal in the manner provided for property tax appeals in sections 3420 and 3421. That goes to the reappraisal language we were talking about before. 20 and 21 are appeals to the Regional Property Valuation Board and the Department of Taxes hearing officer. Do you have questions about that section before we move on?
Representative Bodie.
A little higher on the page, is section 9, is that already in law written like that? You said something.
This is like, if you look at if you use the lister's handbook to try to figure out how to classify when you're doing a property valuation and you need to mark, like this is in line with what you would mark under current law for valuation. It wouldn't mean much, but I guess the point in having those things pair up is to the extent that you're asking listers and assessors to make a decision here, you're at least not asking them to make a decision that they're not already kind of making. And it's based off of what the lister handbook's already having them do. So to minimize the amount of like staff work or extra like leg work.
The only thing that, the reason I raised it, for a couple of reasons, but anyway, one of the things I want to say about this, usually when there's a list, but because you might leave something out, not you, but when the one is writing.
Yeah, and there's also, you know, the way the buckets work is if there's some other use there, then you won't call it undeveloped land. You'll call it whatever the other use is.
And then I had a question about timeshares.
Yeah. Which this says that they're commercial, right?
You remember, it popped into my head and I thought, oh, okay.
Yep, they're listed there.
I
So
have a
wait,
similar-
it's not your, thank you, Representative Wozniak is next, and then Representative Burkhart, and then we are done for the day.
Okay, on the condominium units line, individually based on the actual use of the unit. Just missing the word on there. Which is a wordsmith thing.
Good, no, that's good. This is, I've read that sentence probably
I'm sure
100 times.
Perhaps.
I've not noticed.
And just for the committee writ large, Massachusetts has an extensive property tax classification document. If you just Google Massachusetts property tax classification, it's dozens and dozens of pages. So there's a lot of, if we wanted to add stuff to this, to some of these definitions or have more classifications, that is a great resource.
Thank you. Representative Burkhart.
Sorry for jumping in inappropriately. It was sort of following on Carol's question, though, or Representative Bodie's question, which is commercial just seems slightly odd to me because it lumped timeshares and lodging in with farm buildings and office buildings. And those seem like very different uses that you might want to tax differently. And so I just wondered, was that one of the sections you said came from someone else as a bucket?
It's those things are put together and what they do have in common, which is a business use. It's business. It exists to make money for business. That's why they're together. They don't have to be, obviously.
Industrial is the one that came from the chamber.
So timeshares sometimes under, property law are treated differently than other things. In this case, they're basically being treated like hotels. If you put them in commercial and you put hotels as commercial.
It's not a resort,
Huh?
but timeshare at a
You want to
resort.
throw it in a resort?
No, I
Resort.
don't know what, you're saying there are timeshares at resorts and then I
Okay,
don't know the other ones.
so I think there's a lot that could all be shifted around. This was sort of a best first and second attempt. It incorporates any suggestions we got from stakeholders. And there's still more work to be done on it. We're going to start that work up again tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.
So there are a few, there's other stuff for me to cover, by the way.
Stop.
But we're doing.
Thank you, Kirby.
Thank you, Kirby.
Thank
You will be back.